Hey, friend, welcome back to the YouTube channel for the Renaissance English History Podcast. I am Heather. I've been podcasting on Tudor England since 2009, which makes my show the original OG Tudor podcast. Today, we are going to talk about inventions of the Tudors. Tudor inventions, things that we have today in part because of the Tudors. So let's dig right in. But before we get started, if you want to see more Tudor history in your YouTube feed, go ahead and hit subscribe so you never miss a video that I put out. All right, let's get into it. I've said before that one of the reasons I love this period so much, of course, besides all the drama and intrigue and the fact that everything seemed to be constantly on the verge of chaos, is that we are watching this huge transition from medieval to early modern society. So imagine that you're a 20-year-old Londoner in 1485. You fall asleep. Maybe you had a little bit too much mead, totally no judgment. You wake up in 1603. It was a lot of mead. Your city is unrecognizable. The old religious services are gone. Instead, there's this whole new Protestant fandangled thing happening. Theaters are everywhere. There's a shopping center. People have forks. What is this sorcery? Now, before we get into what the Tudors did invent, let's clear up a couple of things that they didn't. So there are two main things that the Tudors often get credited inventing. I see it pop up all the time when you look at Tudor inventions. That's chocolate and coffee. I hate to be the bearer of bad news, but that's a no. The first coffee houses in England didn't open until the 1650s, which was 50 years after Elizabeth I died. So that whole idea of business transactions happening in a coffee house, it was a thing. It was a Stuart thing. And chocolate, same story. The Tudors missed out. No cafe mochas, no flat whites, no sneaky bits of chocolate before pretending to be virtuous with a salad. But while they didn't give us caffeine-fueled stock market meetings, they did come up with some wildly useful inventions, starting with one that, let's be honest, we all kind of take for granted. That would be the flushing toilet. Ah, the Tudors, so obsessed with hygiene in some ways, absolutely disgusting in others. So into this world walks Sir John Harington, Queen Elizabeth's favorite godson, a man with a sense of humor and an unfortunate knack for irritating people in power. In 1596, Harrington invented a flushing toilet, which he described in a book called Metamorphosis of Ajax, which is hilarious because Ajax is a play on Jakes, Elizabethan slang for toilet. Essentially, he was calling it the transformation of the toilet. Icon. His design involved a water tank above the seat, which would flush away waste with a simple pull of a lever. Revolutionary! Amazing! Queen Elizabeth even installed one at Richmond Palace. So why didn't it catch on right away? Couple of reasons. First, Harrington had a habit of annoying powerful people, which didn't help. Second, his toilet didn't quite solve the problem of what to do with the pit that the waste flushed into. Someone still had to deal with that. So while, it was kind of an improvement, it wasn't exactly the modern plumbing that we know today. It wasn't until the Victorian period, when the unfortunately named Thomas Crapper came along, that flushing toilets became actually functional for everyday use. But hey, the Tudors tried, and that counts for something. Next, let's talk about forks, shall we? Believe it or not, Tudor England was deeply suspicious of forks. Before the early 17th century, English diners used knives, spoons, and their fingers. And no, that didn't necessarily mean that they were filthy barbarians. Hand washing was a big deal, and everyone was very aware of whose fingers had been where. Forks, though, too fancy, too Italian, and possibly dangerous. Some people worried that they'd poke themselves in the mouth with a fork. Enter Thomas Coryate. He was an English traveler. He journeyed through Italy in 1606, so, a little bit after the Elizabethan period, but he saw people using tiny forks to eat their food. He came back to England raving about them and started using one himself. His friends, they mocked him mercilessly. One even nicknamed him Furcifer, which means fork bearer and sounds like an insult that a medieval schoolboy would come up with. Despite the initial resistance, by the end of the 17th century, forks caught on, particularly among the nobility. The common folk continued eating with their hands for a little bit longer because why fix something if it's not broken? Next, the knitting machine, a story of love, rejection, and automation fears. In 1589, a clergyman named William Lee invented the first knitting machine. Why? Well, depending on which version of the story you listen to, it was either because his wife knitted too slowly or because a woman that he loved preferred knitting over spending time with him. Either way, the man was determined to revolutionize the stocking industry. His machine could knit faster and more evenly than a human, but there was one problem. Elizabeth I hated it. She refused to give him a patent, telling him that if his machine took off, it would put England's hand knitters out of work. Lee tried again under James I, still got nowhere, ended up moving to France, where he briefly found success until his biggest supporter, Henry IV, was assassinated. Lee died, totally broke, in 1614, but his invention lived on, eventually becoming a cornerstone of the Industrial Revolution, the textile industry. Clocks and watches. Time, but make it fancy. By the mid 1500s, clocks were getting smaller and more portable, which meant that by the end of the Tudor period, people could actually carry time with them. Enter the Swiss. In the 1540s, John Calvin banned jewelry in Geneva, so Swiss jewelers had to pivot. What did they turn to? Watchmaking. And thus, the Swiss watch industry was born. These fancy little timepieces made their way to England, where Queen Elizabeth I was given England's first wristwatch. Hers even had an alarm, except instead of ringing, it just scratched her finger when it went off. Because why have a bell when you can just mildly injure yourself to wake up? Meanwhile, men typically carried pocket watches, since their work was messier and they didn't want their timepieces getting damaged. Something else that, if you have been around this channel for a while, know that I'm kind of obsessed with, that's the chimney. No more smoke-filled houses. Before the Tudors, houses had open hearths, which meant lots of smoke, bad air, and, occasionally indoor rain if the hole in the roof was too big. It was inefficient, miserable, and basically a fire hazard waiting to happen. Then the Tudor architects perfected the square chimney, lined it with fireproof clay, and it changed everything. Homes became warmer and drier because fireplaces reflected heat better. Rooms got smaller to take advantage of the better heating. Fire risk went down, though, let's be honest, things still caught fire a whole lot. By the late Tudor period, chimneys were a defining feature of the skyline with their signature tall, twisted design. This also, again, if you've been around for a minute or two, you know I'm obsessed with, led to the whole modern concept of privacy, the chimneys, because people started separating out their rooms, and suddenly this whole idea of privacy like we know it was born. Mind-blowing. Then we have starch, the secret behind giant ruffled collars. If you've ever looked at a Tudor portrait and thought, that collar looks like a torture device, you can thank starch. Before starching fabric became a thing, clothes were soft and flowy. But by the late 16th century, stiff, structured collars were all the rage, partly because they looked elegant, and partly because they made the nobility physically take up more space. The bigger your collar, the harder it was for commoners to get near you, and that was the entire point. And of course, once starch entered the picture, everyone went overboard because this was the Tudors and subtlety really wasn't their thing. Next up, the theater, from random street performances to full-on playhouses. Before the 1570s, theater was a traveling business. Actors would go performing from town to town, performing in inn-yards or anywhere that had space. Then came the first permanent theaters in London, places like the Theatre, the Curtain, and of course, the Globe. They were usually outside city limits to avoid strict regulations. There were cheap seats in the pit, standing room only, full of rowdy audience members. Women weren't allowed to act, so teenage boys played the female roles. By 1600, 10% of London's population would go to the theater on a Sunday. That's how wildly popular it had become. I don't know that there's anything that we do today that on a Sunday, 10% of people do it. It's like really popular. Tennis, Henry VIII's favorite pastime. Yes, the Tudors gave us tennis, or at least an early version of it. Henry loved the game. He even had a tennis court built at Hampton Court. It was different, though, from modern tennis. It was more like a mix of squash and handball, played indoors with solid walls. The rackets were basically kitchen sieves attached to wooden handles. Then there was the first shopping mall. Thomas Gresham had a wild idea. Put a bunch of shops in one place so people didn't have to walk all over London to buy things. In 1571, he built the Royal Exchange, England's first shopping center. Elizabeth I came to visit, and because Gresham hadn't yet managed to rent out all of the spaces yet, He staged the whole thing, moving items between stores and stalls so Elizabeth could think that every shop was full, which would have been hilarious. I feel like that's like a Benny Hill or Monty Python skit waiting to happen. It worked either way, and the mall became a success. 400 years later, it's still a luxury shopping destination. So while the Tudors didn't get to enjoy coffee or chocolate, they gave us some semblance of modern plumbing, better heating, and even forks eventually. Their inventions shaped everything from sports to fashion to hygiene. And while some, like the flushing toilet, didn't catch on immediately, others completely transformed daily life. And who knows, if Elizabeth had approved William Lee's knitting machine patent, maybe we would have had an industrial revolution a century early. Who knows? Either way, we can thank the Tudors for some surprising things. All right. If you made it this far in the video and you liked it, I sure would appreciate a press of that like button. It helps to feed the algorithm and get our content to more people. And hey, leave me a comment and let me know your favorite Tudor invention. I would love to know. I also hope I earned your subscription to my channel where I put out videos like this all the time. If you are enjoying this and want even more Tudor content, want to dig even deeper, consider joining my channel. The members only playlist now has close to 100 videos, and depending on your level, you get access to exclusive mini audio courses every month, author chats, discounts on my programs, and so much more. Just click the join button below to check it out. If you want to keep binging Tudor content, I have a lot of videos on a lot of these things we talked about, but here is one on the Royal Exchange, which you might find interesting. And here is a video that YouTube thinks you'll like. Thanks so much for watching. Thank you for being here. Remember, you are deeply loved. I am so glad I share the planet with you. I'll be back very soon. Don't forget to drink your water. Bye-bye.